We are live, sir.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Happy International Transgender Day of Visibility. It's hard to see, but I have on a trans flag bow tie. If people don't know the history, it was started in 2009 because the only kind of day we had was Transgender Day of Remembrance, which is about honoring our dead. And we wanted a way to honor our living. So here we are. And when we planned the date for today, we didn't know that this was the day. So happy coincidence. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you, Shane. Thanks for the great introduction. I am David Johnson, and this is our live chat. Our guest today is Shane Whalley, Z here and here's. Shane is in Austin, and he's a great person to have on our show tonight. Shane Whalley, MSSW, is deeply relational, playful, genderqueer, facilitative educator who has been leading conversations for over 20 years. Z brings depth of knowledge on a range of topics, such as issues faced by the LGBTQIA communities, cultural humility and responsiveness, and social justice frameworks. Here, knowledge comes from lived experience as an elder within the genderqueer and queer communities. Z is currently a social justice educator at the Steve Hicks School of Social Work at the University of Texas, Austin, and has held roles at the Office of Equity, Austin Independent School District, the Gender and Sexuality Center, University of Texas, Austin, and mental health nonprofits in Austin. Welcome, Shane. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, so happy to be here.
Shane, I've got lots of questions. It's hard to keep up with all the changes that occur. Tell everyone, tell me and everyone else what LGBTQIA means.
Yeah, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, or questioning. The I is for intersex, and the A has changed over time. More A's have been added. So, ally, asexual, and agender.
I've
Right.
also seen a plus sign.
Right. And sometimes there's a plus sign. I didn't put the plus sign. I have mixed feelings about it. It's like, it feels like lazy shorthand that we're not adding more letters. Right. And if we leave it off, then we're not acknowledging that there are more letters. Right. While we're sitting here, there are young people at home on TikTok making up new language that we're going to have to learn tomorrow. So,
Right.
right. The alphabet will be forever growing.
That's true. Well, I think you know that I consider myself a social justice warrior. So, in your words, what, or in your point of view, what does social justice mean?
For me, social justice means everybody. Well, okay. So in equity, right? In the concept of equity, not inequity, right? Everybody gets what they need to be successful. In social justice, the systems are set up so we don't have to fight so hard to get what we need to be successful. We can just rest and be successful.
Mm-hmm. In my thinking regarding social justice, a key word is marginalized. And I like the word marginalized because it simply means those who are not in the mainstream. So, in my thinking, it's inclusive. It includes all the people who are not in the mainstream.
Right. Right. And not only are they are in the mainstream, but they're also valued. They don't have barrier. I mean, for me, social justice means nobody has barriers to access.
Yeah.
Everybody has access to all that they need without having to fight extra hard about it
Yep.
or to explain their existence on the planet.
Yep, I would agree. I would agree. Now you have a MSSW degree, and you are currently teaching in the Steve Hicks School of Social Work.
Yep.
Do you consider yourself a social worker or an educator or a little both?
So I can't say that I'm a social worker because I'm not a licensed social worker.
Okay.
I am somebody who has a master's degree in social work. And I don't think of them as separate in a lot of ways, right? Like I wouldn't be doing the work I do in the way that I do it if I didn't have a master's in social work. I just let my license go in this last year, so that's kind of newer for me. It used to be that I would strongly say I was a social worker, right? who happen to be an educator.
Mhm.
They are both very strong parts of me. I wanted to be a social justice educator, which is
Mhm.
why I went to get my master's in social work.
Mhm.
I needed some
Speaking of,
initials to get credibility.
I understand. Speaking of your degrees, how did you get here? The place you are now as a consultant and as a professor at UT Austin, how did you get
Yeah,
here?
yeah. I'm going to fast forward to 40 years old. Nobody needs to know the rest of it. I did years and years of customer service work in a bunch of different fields. I moved to Austin in 1997. And I wanted to be a social justice educator, and I couldn't figure out how to do it. And somebody told me that the School of Social Work had a diversity education institute, and a year later, I was in the master's program. And then I swore I wouldn't be a therapist. And then my first job out of school was I was a therapist, and I worked for an organization called Waterloo Counseling, which is the uh, LGBT counseling center here in Austin. And then I worked at Out Youth, which is our LGBT youth organization. And then for 7 years, I had my dream job. I was the education coordinator for the Gender and Sexuality Center at UT. Gave 100 workshops a year, talked to over 3,000 people a year. I was the voice of my people on my campus. And after 7 years, I decided they needed another voice. And so I started doing some other things. But teaching at the School of Social Work, I've been doing pretty consistently since '05.
Great. Well, I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're
Thank
here.
you.
Our topic for tonight is creating safer classrooms for trans and non-binary students. We have 6 bullets to discuss. Where shall we jump in?
I think maybe the why, right? The why of why this topic is important, right? Just a little bit, right?
Okay.
Um, we've got bills coming out everywhere, right? Bills here in Texas, Florida, Arizona, um,
Oklahoma.
Oklahoma, right? And our trans youth are under attack. There's no simple way to put it, right? And I think that they spend the majority of their day in a classroom. So it's really important that they can be their full, embodied, delightful, lively selves in that classroom. And so making those spaces as safe for them as possible is the reason that I have these conversations.
I saw a statistic today which said, 83% of trans students do not feel, there it is, 83% of transgender students feel unsafe at school.
Yep.
What is it that schools are not doing, and what could schools do to make students feel safe?
Yeah, I think that that's really what that first bullet is about, right? Honoring students' chosen name and pronouns, right? Asking students what pronouns they use, giving your right, like teachers giving their pronouns. You'll notice that I have my pronouns right by my name wherever I go in Zoom, wherever I am electronically. And then really finding out if where students are using that name. A lot of times students are using names at school that they are not using at home because they're not out to their parents, and our names out us. And so, if a student were to come to me as a teacher and say, please use, Shane in the classroom, I would say, and if I'm having a parent teacher conference, what name should I use with your parents? And I need to honor what they tell me, right?
Mhm.
Um, so I think it's all of those pieces. And then it's really seeing yourself, right? Making sure that bullying isn't happening, stopping it when you hear it, making sure that you have books and curriculum in your classroom, making sure that people aren't bullying one another, or that they're not weird gender expectations. I think especially like K through 3, right? Like a boy, I'm going to put it in quotes, right? Who we think of as a boy, is playing with a doll. If they're getting picked on for that, like that's not okay. And that even has nothing to do with being trans or non-binary. That's just stupid gender norms and expectations that we live with.
Mhm.
Right? It's like, how do we get rid of gender norms and expectations in our classroom?
Shane, I have a couple of questions, and I hope I can remember them both. Going back to honor students' names and pronouns, what do we say to the teachers who refuse to honor students' names and pronouns? And some use a reasoning of it's violates their religious freedom or violates their Second Amendment rights, or their First Amendment rights. Excuse me.
Yeah, well, so then you kind of have to back up and you hope that your district has a non-discrimination policy that covers gender identity, gender expression, and sexual orientation. And because if we're not honoring students' names and pronouns, we are actively discriminating against them, and so we're breaking our school's policy. So schools and districts have to have good policy that protects their students, right? And I would also say that treating me with love and respect should not be breaking your religious values. If anything, it's honoring your religious values, right? So I think, conversations about separation of church and state and whose rights trump whose rights, we would need more than 30 minutes.
That's very good.
And we might need beverages. So, right.
Point well taken, sir. Point well taken, Shane. Now here's something I have experienced myself, and I'm certain other people have experienced it as well. So we want to respect that gender is a continuum.
Right.
But we're so accustomed to saying, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. What would be the proper terms to use?
Yes, you have sirred me earlier on too, which would not be my preference, right, around that. So I'm a big fan of, I use folks a lot, right? Like I think we get to kind of, anytime we use binary language, right, this or that box language, we usually can think of a word that goes in between, right? So instead of saying boys and girls, we can say children. In Texas, we can say, for Texas folks, right, or Southern folks, we can say y'all and all y'all. We can talk about people. I think, if we're talking about family dynamics, we can talk about siblings instead of talking about brothers and sisters. Right, we can talk about parents instead of talking about moms and dads. Like there are general terms that are already built, right, that kind of cover and are more expansive in taking the binary out of the conversation.
Well, I guess I must acknowledge.
You must acknowledge.
Yes, slip of the tongue. I'm sorry, sir. As I said, I'm part of the culture, and I've got my challenges as well.
Yeah. I think stirring and mamming is so ingrained in our culture, and trying to ungrain it is probably one of my larger challenges in my life, right? Because I read as an old white dude, and that is not who I am. That is not who I am, but that is how people see me.
Oh boy. I think we identified.
I'm asking a lot of you, David. I'm asking a lot of you, my friend.
Well, keep asking. There's a lot of learning for us all to do, and as we know, learning is never over, particularly when things change so regularly and so frequently. We must continually learn and tap into those young people who are creating words in TikTok and
right tonight. Now. They're TikToking right now.
Right, TikToking right now and making up new words.
Hey, can I just give a reason why I think that's happening? Can I tell you why I think that's happening?
Sure.
Right? Like, I don't think we like to be labeled. I don't think we like boxes, right? But we love to have language around our experience. And our experiences are vast and expansive. And so we're building vast and expansive language, right? And I have people tell me all the time, like, Shane, you can't just make up language. And I'm like, LOL. Like, we're making up language all the time about everything.
There is a linguist, John McWhorter, I believe his name is, and he writes very frequently, and he guest appears on NPR regularly, and he has spoken frequently about how language must change because society is changing, and language must keep up with society. But sometimes it's so fast that we make mistakes even when we mean well.
Yeah.
And so I acknowledge.
You're right. Yep.
All right, let's talk about. Go ahead, please.
Go ahead. Yeah, no, go.
Oh, I was going to ask about bathrooms. You ready to move on to bathrooms?
Sure.
Oh
Yeah.
gosh, that is a difficult topic right there.
It's a sticky wicket, right? But
It
I
is.
think the thing that we don't think, people who don't have a hard time navigating bathrooms, right, don't think about is, say I'm a kid, say I was this kid who didn't feel comfortable in the bathroom, right? So what that meant is I didn't drink liquid through the day, so I didn't have to go. I live in Texas, it's 100 degrees. I now am dehydrated, which makes me sick, which means I can't be attentive in school. So if we don't allow students to go to the bathroom where they feel safest, it is a health concern and hazard for those students. And people are not going into bathrooms to cause trouble. People are going into bathrooms to take care of their bodily functions. And the rest of it is fear mongering, in my humble opinion.
I read an opinion piece today titled "Trans Kids Need to Pee Too," and that's the point you're making. And the consequence of that is being sick or being uncomfortable in
Sick.
class. Right.
Right. Yeah, it's, and most bathrooms have privacy, so nobody's seeing anybody, right? Like nobody's seeing anybody. People are just going in. And I will say that trans and non-binary folks get in and out of bathrooms faster than any other people you'd like to meet, because we know that at any point, most of the violence that happens in bathrooms happens to trans people, does not happen by trans people.
Yeah. You bring up another point: the violence that occurs to trans people.
Yeah, it's terrible, right? Black trans women, so not students, but right, grown women, are at the greatest percentage in danger of being murdered of any population in the United States. Last year, 27%. Right, so that means if four black trans women are having lunch together, the chance that one of them will be killed in their lifetime is statistically accurate. Like, that's not okay, right? That's not okay. Right, and then the other piece that we're having right now with trans youth is mental health, right? Like all of this, having to navigate all of this is impacting mental health. And all the research shows that accepting adults in their life ups the chances of better outcomes for them. So, they may not have an accepting family, but they may have a great teacher, and that teacher literally can save that child's life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Back to bathrooms for a moment.
Yeah.
I think when I first became aware or started becoming aware of the challenges trans students face, seemed like it started with bathrooms.
Yep.
And what I remember is students rejected neutral bathrooms. What's your experience with that?
I think that some people like a single stall bathroom. I love me a good single stall bathroom, but I don't want to have to go to the nurse's office to get to it. I don't want to have to go through sick people every time I have to go to the bathroom, right? Or people wonder why I keep going to the nurse's office. And I think there are a lot of trans and non-binary students, or people, grown adults too, who don't want to be isolated all the time. The answer to keep trans students safe is not isolation, right? And that is often what happens, right? You're going to go on a field trip, you don't know where to house them, you house them by themselves. You don't know what bathrooms to have people use, you send them off by themselves, right? In jails, we don't know where to house people, we put them in solitary confinement, right? Like that. I think for people who know that fun conversations happen in bathrooms, right, and that socialization happens in bathrooms, right, then you don't want to run off by yourself. And in most schools, that gender neutral bathroom is off is way off someplace, and it makes you late. and then you get in trouble because you needed to pee.
I'm thinking of an experience I had actually in the Netherlands. There's a jazz festival that occurs every year, and I recall attending one festival where there was a single bathroom, a long line of both men and women, and we're wondering how are they going to do this when we all get inside the bathroom. And now you've seen those complete water closets.
Yeah,
we see those in the United States. What's your opinion of the water?
I mean, I love here in Austin, right? There are places where it's a line of single stall, right, of just toilets, right? And then you go out to common sinks, right? Like that's right. It's beautiful. One of the other things it does is it creates gender equity because the men's line is always shorter than the women's line. Can we talk about that? Right. So that model kind of equalizes access for for everybody, and it doesn't. The other piece I often hear is like, well, single stall bathrooms take up too much space, but that model actually doesn't. And we've got schools in Austin, new schools that are being built with that model.
Wow.
I think it's right. I think it's brilliant.
Wow.
We got to think outside the box, right?
Yeah. All right, let's jump to our next topic there. Curricula, inclusion in curricula.
Right. Like, right now in Texas, we're trying to ban all kinds of books. Reading, a great thing came out probably on Instagram that said, if reading the books in my childhood made me who I am today, I would be a hungry, hungry caterpillar. Right? Like,
or a cat in the hat, right?
Right. I would be Puff the Magic Dragon. Reading doesn't make you, it only makes you smarter. That is the thing reading books does, right? It gives you more information. If I were to be part of all of the role models that I saw in my life, I would be straight and heterosexual. I'm not, right? Like, I am who I am because that is it, right? And so I think making sure that we have books, making sure that we're having conversations, making sure that we're talking about more complete histories, having kind of images and pictures in. When I worked at the equity office at AISD, I got invited to Story Hour to read books to kids, right? Like it has to be baked in, and so it's not a taboo topic. It should not be a taboo topic.
Shane, another aspect of this is there's so much pressure on teachers to teach to the standards because those will be tested. Yeah. Where would there be room anyway to include a topic that is off standard, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, again, K through 12 and those standards aren't my area of expertise, right? Mm-hmm. But when I think about kind of the conversation we're having right now in Texas around, Austin, people went off the rails about pride, right? It's like, if we're talking about family structures in school, we should be talking about all types of family structures, right? Like, there are people who are raised by grandparents, and there are people who are raised by aunts and uncles, and there are people who are raised by two moms and two dads, or there are people who have a trans parent. So I think it's about, and let's change the standards so they also are inclusive of LGBT ideas, and then we get to teach it in our classrooms, right? I think the other piece that I just want to, it's like a thing for me right now, is one of the things that they were talking about with pride is, well, that's about human sexuality. And it's like, it's not, it's about identity. We're talking about people's identities. We're not talking about sexuality, right? We're talking about who people are. And I think helping kind of separate out, right, all of the strands is helpful, especially if people are in schools where there's pushback, right? It's like, let's talk about what it really is.
Let's dig into that a little bit deeper. You said that when we are born, there are three of us when we were born. on the birth certificate, it represents 3 different things or 3 different people. There,
Oh, yeah, identities, right? Yeah,
3 different identities.
yeah,
Would you
yeah,
speak
right.
to that
We
about
have what's right. We have what's on our birth certificate, right? Like I have an F on my birth certificate, right? And pretty early, I started trying to have conversations with my mom when I was about 10 around my gender identity. It didn't go well. And so I didn't figure it out till I was 34, right? But our gender, right? So birth assigned sex is that box on our birth certificate. Gender identity is that innermost sense of who we know we are. And the research shows that little kids know that at 4 years old, right? But we often say they're too young to know. They're not. They're not too young to know, right? And then we have our gender expression, what we want to wear, how we want to wear our hair. Do we like makeup or not, right? And that's all about who we are. And then sexual orientation is who do we want to be with, right? Who do we love? Who are we interested in getting sassy with, right? Like who do we find attractive? All of those pieces.
Well, one of the points I'd like to make here is when we do not see ourselves, whatever those identities might be, when we don't see ourselves in the curricula, it implies that we are others.
Right. Yep.
Could you speak about that for a moment?
Yeah, I mean, I ended up kind of fully sinking into who I was because I met somebody who looked like me, right? I had a mirror for what was possible, right? And so did that person make me non-binary? They did not. Did they allow me to understand that it was possible? They did, right? And so I think if we don't, and the other thing is like, what if I am a student who has 2 moms and I'm told that that cannot be talked about? You just shamed me about my parents, right? Like that is bad news, right? I go by Ankle Shane to little kids who know me instead of aunt or uncle. I go by Ankle. And there was a little child in my life who was a close family friend and called me Ankle Shane and would talk about me at school because he liked me. And the little kid said, there's no such thing as that. So he had to come back to me and say, I'm sorry, I can't call you that anymore. That isn't a real thing. That was heartbreaking for both of us. And about 6 months later, he came back and he's like, I don't care, Ankle Shane. I'm just going to use it. And I'll talk to my kids. I'll talk to my friends, right? But like, he shouldn't have had to navigate that. He was like 6 or 7 years old.
Shane, we have 2 minutes remaining. Last bullet.
Sorry, say that again.
Last bullet.
Yeah. I mean, you just have to know that all that is happening in the news right now is impacting our students, right? Whether it is about them or whether it is about their parents or or a family member or a friend of their family, right? Like we talk about the term minority stress, right? And this is minority stress on steroids.
So what could a teacher or a school do when we know that the news is having an effect on students?
So I have a college student, right? I have a student in my class who's trans. And the day that the decision came down around, parents and gender affirming care, I had a private moment with him and I'm like, how are you? And he's like, you're the only person who's asked me all day. Right? We don't do it publicly, right? But we check in with our students and find out how they're doing, right? How's the news? What's going on? Right? Like, I can imagine this might be hard for you. I think we have to, with any traumatic event that happens to a marginalized community, we need to be checking in with our people to find out how they're doing.
Cool. Man, we have only, sorry, I did it again. I'm sorry. We have only 30 seconds left.
Yeah.
What is your call to action? What is it you want people to do?
For me, it's like pronouns. Ask them, honor them, actually learn them, right? Learn them, practice, right? Honor them, and then, figure out how you kind of acknowledge, apologize, do better, right? And then hold your schools accountable to do the right thing.
Mhm.
Hold schools accountable to do the right thing. And I know that that can be hard depending on where you are. But like our kids' lives are at stake.
Shane, if people want to know more, how shall they contact you?
So I have a website, which is just myfullname.com. I'm on LinkedIn. I use Twitter, so I'm at Gender in Blender. You can chuckle about the name, my handle. My email address is myfullname@gmail.com. So please be in touch. If you have
Mr.
questions, if you're looking for resources, I have lists and lists of resources. So
Mr. Shane Whalley, owner, Daring Dialogues Consulting, Austin, Texas, and adjunct professor, School of Social Work, University of Texas, Austin. Thank you for being here with us this evening. And you're a fountain of knowledge, and I wish I could learn more, drink more from your so we'll be in touch. I look
thank you
forward
for the time.
Oh, my pleasure. I look forward to seeing you again.
All right.
All right.
Bye.
You have a good evening.